You mentioned that the intellectuals and academics, journalists, most of them, human rights organizations which were very active during the Israeli occupation, now they are not doing their role in protecting the Palestinian community. Where do you see the light, the end of the tunnel? Where do you see the breakthrough? How do you think from this reality, very sad reality, the Palestinian community can go through?
Sometimes for the human rights organizations, there are some organizations who are functioning, from a political views. That they are willing to defend Hamas prisoners as an example, but not collaborators who are arrested by the Palestinian Authority. With the journalists, the problem that there is a kind of a self-censorship today, and that's much more difficult than any other official censorship in any state. So because the Palestinian Authority already arrested several tens of journalists since they came to the territories, so every journalist now knows exactly what the Palestinian Authority is interested in. If we will talk as an example about the Israeli abuses, every journalist is coming, Palestinian journalist, and every newspaper is willing, to bring your research or your report on the Israeli violations in the front page. But what about the Palestinian? No, Jibril Rajoub will be upset, Mohammed Dahlan will be angry, the president, will maybe ban the newspaper. So, who is going, to protect the rights of these journalists? Sometimes they are asking me, if we will report about the Palestinian Authority, you will protect us from the Palestinian Authority? I said no. I even unable to protect myself under the Palestinian Authority. Some people thought that if our organization is located in East Jerusalem, it's giving us a kind of protection. But it's never, because I was arrested from East Jerusalem on the 3rd January 96 during the election campaign to the Legislative Council. And because I criticized President Arafat personally in that time, why he is using the Palestinian TV for his own campaign and didn't allow to any Palestinian candidate to appear on the Palestinian TV. Immediately I was arrested. Immediately on the same day after I gave that statement for 25 hours. And only because the media I was released. Not because the intervention of anybody. So sometimes we have contacts, as an example, with the French organization Reporters Without Borders in France, that we are trying through these people, to bring a kind of meeting or conference, between international journalists and Palestinian journalists, in terms to teach them exactly how they must have to act under their own government. But sometimes it seems that such kind of conferences, it will be evaporated immediately when you come back to the territories. And nobody is willing to implement the conclusion and the recommendations of these meetings. So for the intellectual, I gave a good example about Dr. Fathi Subuh. Even his colleagues refused to sign on a petition calling the president to release him. So we have, the main problem is today that there is nothing means public. There is no thing that we can call, there is no consensus on what we call public. There is a consensus on what we call a personal interests. And everybody is interested in his personal issues and not in the public issues. Yeah. Yes.
You mentioned that you have 4 members of the Palestine Legislative Council on the board of your organization. it seems puzzling in a way from what you've said that the Legislative Council itself does not play a more active or effective role in dealing with these issues. And I'm wondering, you would think that the council, which consists of more or less freely elected deputies from different districts, would be the logical sort of vehicle, structural kind of manifestation for some kind of counterbalancing against this personal rule that you're speaking of. Is it doing that at all? Do you think it could do that? And if it's not, can you explain a little bit as to why not?
Unfortunately, the Palestinian Legislative Council becomes, a kind of a rehabilitation center for handicapped people. And as I know that there are some representatives in the Legislative Council who are looking for somebody to represent them in the Legislative Council. We have the monitoring committee in the Legislative Council which is supposed to deal with the human rights issues. I remember when Dr. Fathi Subuh arrested in Gaza, we called the head of the monitoring committee in the Legislative Council about the arrest of Dr. Subuh. The head of the monitoring committee promised to go on the next day to visit Dr. Subuh and to check the investigation file. So he went on the next day, and later on he called us and he said, I am sorry, Dr. Subuh already confessed that he is a collaborator. And he never. Dr. Subuh never confessed that he is a collaborator. So the monitoring committee also has, their own political views. Most of the members of the monitoring committee believes that we have to blame the occupation on the abuses committed by the Palestinian Authority, because we are still occupied. And how I can blame the Israelis when Muhammad tortured in the Gaza Central Prison? How I can blame the Israelis? I will never accept that. So some of the members who are, as an example, two who are already on our board of trustees, interfere in the case of the corruption under the Palestinian Authority. And these two members already participated in the writing of the report on the corruption under the Palestinian Authority. We are trying to keep a kind of a close relationship with the monitoring committee, which is supposed to protect the rights of these people from inside the Legislative Council. Sometimes it's difficult. Sometimes, as you know, so many orders already given by the Legislative Council, and the Palestinian Authority until now refused to implement them. So if the Palestinian Authority refused to implement them, or even to give a kind of publicity for the Legislative Council, you know that there are representatives in the Legislative Councils, who never appear in the Palestinian newspapers, because he becomes an opposition for the Palestinian Authority. So why to interview him? If we will interview him and his name will mentioned in the newspaper, the president will become upset. Maybe the journalist will be arrested by one of the security services. So there is no publicity, and that's exactly why some of the members of the Legislative Council trying today to create a kind of a monthly newspaper to talk about the sessions in the Legislative Council. You remember the Palestinian journalist Dawood Kuttab. He already has a contract to cover the Palestinian legislative sessions. Even that he got a contract, he was arrested for 6 days, because the Palestinian Authority don't think that the people, the community, has the right to know what is the Palestinian Legislative Council is discussing. They don't know. So if the journalist already arrested, so I can guess, what the other legislative council members are thinking about. Yeah. Yes.
What role do you think that the United States can play as far as putting pressure on Arafat? Because you said when the United States and the Israeli put pressure on Arafat to be tough on the terrorists, they were doing that severely. So now that they moved away from torturing the terrorist organizations, do you think the U.S. does not want to or doesn't want to interfere as far as torturing the Palestinian people itself?
The United States government has a very bad image in the Palestinian minds, because when such kind of violations committed by the Palestinian Authority from time to time announcing that this is the result of the Americans' pressure. So what I suggest to the United States government is just to take off the old pressure from the Palestinian Authority and becomes much more neutral in the region. Not to involve, in any political status, not to try to put any kind of pressure on the Palestinian Authority to oppress any opposition. Just to keep far away and to try to do what they can in terms to improve the situation of the human rights. But they will never be able to improve the situation of human rights if they will continue pressuring the Palestinian Authority to oppress the opposition and the Islamist movements. We have from time to time a very good contacts with the diplomats in Israel and in the PA, and we have a very good meetings from time to time to give them an update about the human rights situation in Palestine. We have a very good contacts with the international media also, which I believe that the media is doing the best as they can in terms to put pressure on the Palestinian Authority. And we know how much the Palestinian Authority is so sensitive for the media. You remember in December last year, the 60 Minutes broadcasted a program about the human rights in Palestine. And immediately after they broadcasted the program, one of Arafat's advisors sent a letter to the director of the CBS by saying that your program was unfair program because you never mentioned the Israeli violations. He wants to give himself a kind of legitimacy. We received a copy from the CBS of the letter that they received from Arafat's advisor. We called the Ministry of Information, which kind of letter, because in the letter Bassam Abu Sharif mentioned that the Palestinian Authority already took a decision not to allow to your correspondents to enter to the autonomous area. So we called the Ministry of Information, which kind of letter the Arafat's advisor sent to the CBS, and in the Ministry of Information they said that Bassam Abu Sharif expressed his own opinion, and it's never ratified to the Palestinian Authority opinion. So how it could be? But in the letter it's a very big logo, the President Office, the Palestinian National Authority, and on the second page he signed Bassam Abu Sharif, the President Advisor. How in such kind of letters a person can express his personal opinion? How it could be? So they said it was a mistake that he sent that letter to the CBS. So the media who can put pressure. Now the governments also from time to time, they must have to raise the issue of human rights, not only just to support in millions of dollars, which the community never get any benefits from all of these millions. they must have also to raise the question of human rights, and in some conditions the support must have to be also related to the respect of these rights. Yes.
It's very difficult to understand how all of this is happening. Your explanation that the leadership of the Palestinians grew up in countries where you didn't criticize your government is interesting, but I think it's more complicated, and I wonder if you could talk a little bit more about that. It seems to me that the PLO in exile was far more democratic than the Palestinian Authority.
Mm-hmm.
And there has to be more reason as to why, and if you could figure out why, perhaps you could begin to resolve it.
See, I couldn't give here a kind of analysis, on the mentality of the Palestinian Authority. But one of the major problems that the people who already during the Intifada accused in the killing of collaborators, and these people were arrested by the Israelis and even some of them sentenced for a life imprisonment. After the Oslo agreement, 6,000 of these people already released by Rabin government, and all of these people today are acting in the security services. Now, when somebody killed, 2 or 3 or 4 people, so we can know exactly which mentality he already got and how this person is going to behave in the community. Now, as you know, the Scandinavians suggested to the Palestinian Authority a kind of training, but the training was effectiveness, because the Scandinavian, when they accept these policemen members, they never check the record of these people. Who are these people? Now, when we talked with the Scandinavian about that, they said, no, we couldn't ask for these people records. Otherwise, the Palestinian Authority will blame us that we are trying to interfere in their internal affairs. So why to ask for these records? But listen, the one that you gave him the training, he is a killer. He is a killer. Which kind of training you can give him, to make him a good person, to wash, his mind from the old bloody things that he made during his life. They said, this is not our problem, this is the authority problem. The authority who must have to choose the correct people and to put these correct people in the correct position. This is not our position, this is the authority position. Now, on the other side, there are also some other reasons why the Palestinian Authority is acting in that way, which I am not so willing, to talk about. Yes.
Joseph Shepard. You mentioned that the United States is interested in protecting land dealers. And I was wondering if you could just explain that a little bit.
Yeah, you know that during the last year, 3 Palestinian land dealers killed, which the Palestinian Authority suspected, in their involving in that kind of killing. Now, we said in many times that selling land to the Jews in the current situation is one of the biggest nationalist offenses which can be committed. Now, 3 people killed. We know how the United States media act toward that issue. We gave so many interviews, mostly to the American newspapers than the European newspapers. The Israelis also start acting to put pressure on the Palestinian Authority to stop such kind of killing. I think that there were several announcements from the State Department in the United States against the killing of these people, which means at least that after the statements that we hear from the State Department, no more land dealers killed in Palestine. Most of them already arrested. We know about more than 50 Palestinians who accused as land dealers by the Palestinian Authority were arrested. Some of them already spent in jail more than 1 year without any charges and without trial. But the pressure of the United States on the Palestinian Authority to stop killing land dealers worked well.
So it was the interest in intervening in cases of capital punishment. But does the United States take any action that you know of to protect those who are in
No,
custody?
they are not. They are not taking, any let's say, any field action, let's say, today to protect these people. But what we know, according to the Oslo Agreement, the Palestinian Authority is not allowed to bring collaborators, as an example, for trial. Now, the land dealers also accused as collaborators. So the Palestinian Authority is not allowed to bring these people for trial. But the problem is that these people can be kept in jail even for more than 2 years without any charges and without any trial. And I don't think that anyone, even the United States or the Israeli government, can bring to release these people. So in the field, you couldn't feel, any kind of protection from either the United States nor the Israelis towards the land dealers. Yeah. Yes.
Firstly, I'd like to thank you for the great presentation you gave here. And as an Israeli, I know that it's not easy to be in such a situation as you are.
Does it mean terrorism? Now, for the Israelis, people who are planning, as an example, to bombing themselves or to commit suicide, these people are a terrorist people. This is the Israeli meaning. Now, when the Israeli guys are against the selling land to the Israelis, you also a terrorist. So what does it mean, terrorist? And this is one of the most complicated things between the Palestinian Authority and the Israelis. The Israelis want the Palestinian Authority to accept everything without even to negotiate, without even to make a kind of a dialogue. What does it mean? The Israelis are pressure suffering, and such kind of suffer will violating the Israeli internal security. Security will never be built on the human rights abuses. Security will be achieved why they open a branch for the CIA and not for an international human rights organization, as an example, to observe the violations of the both sides. Now, what the CIA is going to do there is the main mission, I think, of the CIA is how to put pressure on the Palestinian Authority to cooperate in the security affair with the Israelis. This is the main mission of the CIA in Palestine. The CIA will never protect the Palestinians' rights. The main mission of the CIA today to go to Gaza and to check if the Palestinian Authority already arrested the people that the Israelis demand.
I'm Mark Bruzonsky, your host for this weekly program, Mideast Realities, and thank you for watching. If you too are concerned about the situation in today's Middle East and about U.S. policies toward that crucial region of the world, and if you'd like to meet like-minded persons, why don't you come to one of our weekly social meetings? I'll be there, of course. Just give us a call for details.